3 college friends sent a text message that should have meant relief. Instead, those 4 words became the beginning of a mystery that would haunt 2 families for nearly a decade. When Maya Chen, Derek Sullivan, and Amy Winters typed, "We're almost there," on a September afternoon, they had no idea they were sealing their fate. The message arrived at 3:47 p.m., pinging the phones of worried parents who had been expecting their kids home hours earlier. Search teams would later use those words as proof the 3 students were close to safety, close to the trailhead parking lot where their car sat waiting. But 9 years would pass before anyone understood the terrible irony of that final text. What rescuers eventually found, hidden in a place no one thought to look, revealed a truth so simple and so devastating that it changed how search teams across the country approach missing persons cases. This is the story of 3 bright young people, 1 innocent mistake, and the 4 words that misled everyone trying to save them. If this already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button for more stories that stay with you long after they end. Maya Chen had been planning the hike for 3 months. She was the type of person who printed maps, checked weather forecasts a week in advance, and made lists for everything. Her roommates at Cascade University joked that Maya could organize a military operation if she wanted to. So when she proposed a celebration hike to mark the end of their junior year finals, both Derek and Amy knew it would be perfectly planned. Derek Sullivan was the opposite. He went through life with the easy confidence of someone who believed things would work themselves out. He played guitar in a campus band, forgot assignments until the night before they were due, and somehow always landed on his feet. His friendship with Maya was built on opposites attracting. Where she worried, he laughed. Where she planned, he improvised. They balanced each other. Amy Winters fell somewhere in between. Quiet and thoughtful, she was studying environmental science and had grown up camping with her family every summer. She knew plants, could identify animal tracks, and felt more at home in the woods than in crowded lecture halls. When Maya suggested the hike to Whispering Ridge, a moderately challenging trail in the Cascade foothills, Amy had been the one to confirm it was a good choice for their skill level. The 3 of them had become inseparable during freshman year. They studied together, ate meals together, and spent Friday nights watching old movies in the common room of their dorm. By junior year, they were more like siblings than friends. The hike was meant to be their celebration, a way to mark the end of a difficult semester before they scattered for summer break. On September 14th, they left campus at dawn. Maya drove, her small blue sedan packed with 3 backpacks, water bottles, granola bars, and a first aid kit that Amy had insisted on bringing. The plan was simple. They would hike the 7-mile trail to Whispering Ridge, have lunch at the summit overlook, and be back at the trailhead by 4 in the afternoon. Maya had texted her mother the itinerary. Derek had posted a photo on social media showing the 3 of them grinning in the parking lot at 6:30 a.m. with the caption, "Adventure Time." The Whispering Ridge Trail was popular with day hikers. It wound through Douglas fir forests, crossed 2 small creeks, and offered spectacular views of the valley below from its highest point. Park rangers considered it safe. Families with children hiked it regularly. In decent weather, it presented no serious dangers to reasonably fit young adults. The morning was clear and cool. Other hikers on the trail that day would later tell investigators they saw 3 college-age kids heading up the mountain around 7. One couple remembered them because Maya had stopped to take a picture of wildflowers near the first creek crossing. A solo hiker recalled Derek making a joke about forgetting bug spray. Everyone agreed the 3 seemed happy, prepared, and unremarkable. By noon, Maya sent her mother a text saying they had reached the halfway point and were making good time. Her mother responded with a smiley face and a reminder to stay hydrated. It was the kind of casual exchange that happens 1,000 times a day between parents and their kids. At 2:15 p.m., Derek posted another photo, this one showing the view from what appeared to be a rocky outcrop. The valley stretched out below, and the caption read, "Worth every step." His mother would later zoom in on that photo over and over, studying the trees in the background, the angle of the shadows, trying to understand where her son had been standing when he took it. The afternoon stayed clear. Weather records would show no sudden storms, no unexpected temperature drops, nothing that should have posed a threat. Other hikers completed the trail that day without incident. A family of 4 passed the summit at 3 p.m. and saw no sign of the 3 students. At 3:47 p.m., Maya's phone sent its last signal. The text message went to both her mother and Amy's father, who had also been checking in throughout the day. 4 words appeared on their screens. "We're almost there." Both parents felt a wave of relief. Almost there meant almost back to the car, almost safe, almost home. But 4 p.m. came and went with no follow-up message. By 4:30, Maya's mother tried calling. The phone rang once and went to voicemail. She tried again at 4:45 with the same result. Amy's father called Derek's phone at 5 hours. No answer. He called Maya's phone. No answer. He called Amy's phone, and it went straight to voicemail as if the battery had died. By 5:30, both families were actively worried. By 6 hours, they were calling each other. By 6:30, Maya's father was in his car driving the hour and a half to Whispering Ridge. By 7 p.m., when he pulled into the trailhead parking lot, the sun was setting, and Maya's blue sedan sat alone in the gravel lot, exactly where she had parked it 11 hours earlier. The first search began that night. Maya's father called 911 from the parking lot at 7:15 p.m. Within an hour, a deputy sheriff arrived with 2 volunteer search and rescue members. They hiked up the trail with flashlights and called the names of the missing students into the darkness. The forest swallowed their voices. No one answered. By midnight, 12 searchers were combing the main trail. They found nothing. No dropped items, no signs of anyone leaving the path, no indication of distress. The trail was well maintained and clearly marked. It seemed impossible that 3 people could vanish from it without a trace. The next morning brought 40 searchers, 2 tracking dogs, and a helicopter. The story had already reached local news. 3 college students missing on a routine hike made for an alarming headline. The families arrived at the command post that had been set up in the parking lot. Maya's mother held her phone, staring at that last text message. "We're almost there." The words seemed to promise her daughter's safety, even as hours stretched into a full day with no answers. The search coordinator, a veteran ranger named Robert Hayes, focused his teams on the final 2 miles of the trail. The text message had given them a clear indication of where to look. If the students were almost back to the trailhead at 3:47 p.m., they had to be somewhere in that last stretch. Teams walked it over and over. They checked every possible side path, every place someone might have stepped off to rest or take a photo. The dogs followed the trail all the way to the parking lot, and then lost the scent. It was as if the 3 students had simply walked the trail, reached their car, and evaporated. But the car was still there. Their car keys were not in it. Their backpacks were gone. They had not returned. On the 3rd day, investigators began to consider other possibilities. Could the students have left the trail intentionally? Could they have had a reason to disappear? They interviewed friends, professors, and roommates. Everyone gave the same answer. Maya, Derek, and Amy were happy, stable, and had no reason to vanish. Maya had a summer internship starting in 2 weeks. Derek had concert tickets for the following weekend. Amy had already bought her textbooks for fall semester. The families begged the media to keep the story alive. Flyers with 3 smiling faces appeared on telephone poles across 2 counties. A reward fund grew to $15,000. Tips came in, each one investigated, and leading nowhere. Someone thought they saw 3 young people hitchhiking on a highway 40 miles away. It was not them. Another caller reported hearing voices in the woods near a different trail. Search teams found nothing. By the end of the first week, searchers had covered over 30 square miles of forest. They had walked every marked trail in the area, checked abandoned campsites, and searched along every creek and ravine they could access. The helicopter had scanned the forest canopy with thermal imaging. Nothing. The Whispering Ridge Trail became a place of pilgrimage for the families. They returned again and again, walking it themselves, trying to understand. Maya's mother would stand at the trailhead and imagine her daughter's last moments. Had she been afraid? Had she called for help? The not knowing was worse than any answer could have been. As weeks became months, the search efforts scaled back. Volunteer teams still went out on weekends. The families hired a private investigator who had experience with missing persons cases. He reviewed every piece of evidence, interviewed everyone again, and walked the trail himself a dozen times. His conclusion matched everyone else's. 3 people had entered the forest and never come out. It made no sense. The first anniversary brought renewed media attention and a fresh search effort. 50 volunteers spent a weekend covering ground they had already covered a dozen times. They found nothing new. The second anniversary was quieter. By the 3rd year, the story had faded from public attention. By the 5th year, only the families still actively searched. Maya's mother developed a theory. She believed something had happened off-trail, that her daughter and her friends had stepped into the woods for some reason and become lost or injured. But which direction? The forest was vast. Without knowing where they left the trail, searching was like trying to find 3 needles in 1,000 haystacks. Derek's father took a different approach. He studied maps, learning every geographic feature of the area. He became convinced there was a hidden ravine or cave system that searchers had missed. He spent his weekends hiking alone, checking places that seemed too remote or too unlikely. He found nothing but began to understand how someone could disappear in these woods. The forest was denser than it appeared. Valleys and hollows hid themselves behind ridges. Even in daylight, a person could be 20 feet from a trail and be completely invisible to anyone walking past. Amy's parents grew quieter as the years passed. They kept their daughter's room exactly as she had left it. They marked her birthday every year with a small ceremony at the trailhead. They never stopped hoping for answers, but learned to live with the possibility they might never come. 9 years after the 3 students disappeared, the forest had mostly forgotten them. The investigation was officially cold. The reward fund still existed, but had not received a serious tip in over 3 years. The families had aged in the particular way that grief ages people, carrying a permanent weight that never quite lifts. In September, 17 days after the anniversary of the disappearance, a man named Thomas Brennan was hiking in the area with his teenage son. Thomas was an experienced outdoorsman who had hiked the Whispering Ridge Trail many times over the years. He knew about the missing students. Everyone who hiked regularly in these mountains knew the story. On this particular Saturday, Thomas decided to show his son a different route, back to the parking lot. Instead of retracing their steps down the main trail, he wanted to loop around using an old fire access road that ran parallel to the trail about a half-mile to the east. The road was barely maintained anymore, used mainly by Park Service vehicles a few times a year. Most hikers did not even know it existed. Father and son followed the fire road as it curved down the mountain. The going was slower than the main trail. The road was overgrown in places, and they had to push through brush occasionally. At one point, Thomas stopped to check his GPS, confirming they were heading in the right direction. His son had wandered a few steps off the road, looking at something in the underbrush. "Dad!" he called out. "There's something weird over here." Thomas walked over. At first, he thought his son had found an old camping spot. There was fabric partially covered by years of fallen leaves and forest debris, but as Thomas looked closer, his stomach tightened. The fabric was a backpack, so faded and weathered that its original color was hard to determine. Next to it, partially hidden by a fallen log, was another backpack. Thomas told his son to stay where he was. He pulled out his phone but had no signal this deep in the trees. He marked the location on his GPS and then carefully moved closer to examine what they had found. His years of hiking experience told him immediately that these items had been here for a long time. The fabric was degraded, the metal zippers corroded. Leaves and dirt had built up around them, and small plants were growing through the straps. Then he saw the first bone. It was small, partially buried, white, and weathered. Then another. Thomas backed away slowly and guided his son back to the fire road. "We need to get to a phone," he said quietly. "Right now." They half ran, half walked down the mountain. It took them 40 minutes to reach the parking lot. Thomas called 911 immediately. The operator asked if anyone was injured, if there was an immediate emergency. Thomas took a breath and said words he had hoped never to say. "I think I found those missing hikers from 9 years ago, within 2 hours. The forest was full of sheriff's deputies, search and rescue coordinators, and forensic investigators." Thomas led them back to the spot. The area was immediately secured as a potential crime scene. The families were notified but asked to stay away while the investigation proceeded. Over the next 3 days, forensic teams carefully excavated the site. They found 3 sets of remains scattered by time and animals across an area of about 40 square yards. They found personal items, 3 student ID cards in protective plastic, a water bottle, a cell phone so damaged by weather that it was barely recognizable, shreds of clothing, and pieces of 3 different backpacks. The location was baffling. The remains were not on the trail. They were not near the trail. They were approximately a quarter mile from the main trail, down a steep slope in an area of dense forest that had no reason for anyone to visit. No paths led to it. No landmarks marked it. It was simply a random spot in thousands of acres of wilderness. More puzzling was the distance from where that final text message had been sent. Cell tower records from 9 years earlier had pinged Maya's phone to a location about 1.5 miles up the trail from where the remains were found. If they were almost back to the parking lot when they sent that message, how did they end up a quarter mile off trail in the opposite direction? The forensic investigation took weeks. Dental records confirmed the identities. Maya Chen, Derek Sullivan, and Amy Winters had been found. After 9 years, the families finally had an answer to the most basic question. Their children were dead. But a harder question remained. How? The medical examiner found no evidence of foul play, no bullet holes in bone, no knife marks, no signs of violence. The remains showed no indication of animal attack as the cause of death. No large predators had killed them. Whatever happened, it happened to all 3 of them in the same place, at roughly the same time. The state of decomposition and weathering made it impossible to determine exact causes of death, but the positioning of the remains suggested they had died where they were found. Investigators returned to the cell tower data. That final text message, "We're almost there," had pinged from a location that was now marked precisely on digital maps. Teams hiked to that spot and examined it carefully. It was a perfectly ordinary stretch of trail, nothing dangerous or unusual about it. Then a young investigator named Sarah Chen, no relation to Maya, asked a question that changed everything. What if they weren't on the trail when they sent that text? The lead investigator, Robert Hayes, the same ranger who had coordinated the original search 9 years earlier, stopped and stared at her. "The text was sent at 3:47 p.m., he said slowly. "Cell tower puts it on the trail." "Cell towers triangulate within a certain range," Sarah said. "What's the margin of error?" They checked. The margin of error was approximately a quarter mile. The ping that placed Maya's phone on the trail could just as easily have placed it a quarter mile off the trail. No one had considered this possibility during the original search because the text message itself seemed to confirm they were on the trail heading back. "We're almost there," meant almost to the parking lot. Or so everyone had assumed. But what if they were not talking about the parking lot? What if "almost there" meant something else entirely? Investigators pulled up every piece of data from that day. Derek's social media post from 2:15 p.m. showed a view from a rocky outcrop. Photo analysis experts examined the image, comparing it to known views along the Whispering Ridge Trail. After 2 days of careful analysis, they determined the photo was not taken from the main trail. The angle was wrong. The landmarks visible in the background did not line up with any point on the official path. Derek had been somewhere off trail when he took that photo, and if he was off trail, Maya and Amy were with him. investigators began to reconstruct what might have happened. Somewhere between the summit and the final stretch back to the parking lot, the 3 students had left the main trail. The question was why. A search of hiking blogs and the social media from 9 years earlier provided a possible answer. Several posts from that summer mentioned a rumor among local hikers about a hidden waterfall somewhere near Whispering Ridge. The waterfall was not marked on any official maps. It was described as a local secret, a beautiful spot that required a short, off-trail hike to reach. The posts were vague about the exact location, but they all mentioned the waterfall was somewhere on the eastern side of the main trail. Maya's laptop had been returned to her family after the initial investigation turned up nothing useful. Now, investigators asked to examine it again. In her browser history from the week before the hike, they found searches for Hidden Waterfall, Whispering Ridge, and Secret Spots, Cascade Trails. The pieces began to fit together. Maya had planned the hike meticulously, but she had also found references to this hidden waterfall. It would have appealed to her. A secret spot. Something special to mark their celebration. She likely found vague directions online, something like, leave the trail near mile marker 5, head east through the trees, you'll hear the water. Park officials who had worked in the area for decades were interviewed again. An older ranger remembered the waterfall. It existed, or at least it had existed 20 years earlier. It was a seasonal feature, flowing strongly in spring and early summer, reduced to a trickle or dry completely by late summer. It was small, maybe 15 feet high, tucked into a narrow ravine that was easy to miss if you did not know exactly where to look. The ranger walked investigators to the general area where he remembered it being. They were approximately a quarter mile east of the main trail. The terrain was steep and covered in dense undergrowth. Finding the ravine took hours, but they eventually located it. A thin crack in the earth, perhaps 6 feet wide at its broadest point, hidden by overhanging trees and thick ferns. At the bottom of the ravine, perhaps 20 feet below the forest floor, there was indeed a small waterfall, or what had been one. Now it was just a damp, rocky wall with moss growing on it. But in mid-September, 9 years earlier, after a wet summer, it would have been flowing. The investigators looked at the ravine and understood. The students had left the trail looking for the waterfall. They had been almost there, almost to the ravine, when Maya sent that text. In their minds, finding the waterfall was the goal, the destination. They were almost there, almost to their secret spot. But the ravine was a trap. In the dense forest, it was nearly invisible until you were right on top of it. The edges were soft with moss and years of accumulated leaves. There was no warning, no guardrail, no sign. One moment, you were walking through ordinary forest. The next moment, the ground disappeared. Forensic analysis of the site where the remains were found confirmed what investigators now suspected. The position of the bones, the scatter pattern, the angle of the slope, all suggested a fall. 3 people had fallen into the ravine, but the fall alone should not have killed all 3 of them. The ravine was not deep enough for a fatal fall in most circumstances. So, what had happened? The answer came from a structural engineer who specialized in analyzing accident sites. He examined the ravine carefully, taking measurements and photos. Then he explained. The ravine had steep, nearly vertical walls. If someone fell in, they would slide and tumble down to the bottom, likely sustaining injuries but probably surviving. The problem was getting out. The walls were too smooth and too steep to climb without equipment. The ravine was narrow enough that no sunlight reached the bottom. Cell phone signals did not penetrate into the earth, and the ravine was positioned in such a way that anyone inside it would be completely invisible and inaudible to anyone passing on the trail a quarter mile away. The 3 students had fallen into a natural trap. They had survived the fall, but were injured, possibly badly. They were trapped at the bottom of a ravine that no one knew they were in a location that was not on any map, with no way to signal for help and no way to climb out. They had died slowly from injuries and exposure, while rescue teams walked the main trail over and over, never knowing they needed to search a quarter mile to the east. The final pieces of the puzzle came together through careful analysis of the few items recovered with the remains. Maya's cell phone, though badly damaged, was sent to a specialist lab where technicians managed to extract fragments of data from its memory. They recovered one additional piece of information. At 3:52 p.m., 5 minutes after the "we're almost there" text was sent, Maya had tried to make a phone call. The call never connected, never even triggered a tower ping. She had been out of range by then, probably already at the bottom of the ravine, but the fact that she tried to call meant she knew something was wrong. They had sent the text while still approaching the ravine, excited about finding their secret waterfall. Minutes later, they had fallen. Maya had tried to call for help, but it was too late. The earth had swallowed them. The investigator Sarah Chen wrote in her final report that the tragedy was a compound of small decisions and bad luck. The decision to search for an unmarked waterfall, the timing of their arrival in mid-afternoon when shadows made the ravine even harder to see, the wet summer that had left the ravine edges soft, the simple fact that all three were together when one of them stepped too close to the edge. Most haunting was the realization that if they had been on the main trail when they sent that text, they would have been found. The original search had been thorough and well executed, but everyone had assumed "we're almost there" meant they were almost back to the parking lot, almost safe. The text message that should have led searchers to them instead sent them looking in the wrong direction. The families finally had their answers, though the answers brought cold comfort. There had been no violence, no malice, no monster, just 3 young people looking for a moment of beauty and finding instead a hidden danger that the forest had kept secret for nearly a decade. The ravine was filled in by park services 3 weeks after the discovery. Officials installed barriers and warning signs in the area. The old fire road where Thomas Brennan had walked with his son was cleared and marked, turned into an official alternate route with clear signage. Maya Chen, Derek Sullivan, and Amy Winters were buried in a ceremony attended by hundreds. The 3 friends were laid to rest, side by side, finally home after their long wait in the forest. Their families found some measure of peace in knowing the truth, even though the truth was hard. The Whispering Ridge Trail remains popular with hikers. On clear days, you can still see people making the climb to the summit, taking photos of the valley below, enjoying the beauty of the forest. Most of them do not know the story of the 3 students who came here looking for something special and never made it home. Their story serves as a reminder that wilderness, no matter how well traveled, carries risks that are not always visible. A hidden ravine, a moment of distraction, 4 words sent with excitement instead of fear, and 3 lives were lost to a place that held them for 9 years before giving them back. Sometimes the most dangerous mysteries are the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting just off the path we think we know.